You have years of experience walking the path away from suffering and towards wisdom, towards enlightenment. You work with people, I'm sure you work with thousands of people, helping them. But where does it start? 10-year-old Tom, what's he doing? And how does he end up being involved in the spiritual path?
I was actually very interested in science as a child, and my father and I built a laboratory because he realized I was poisoning everybody in the house, not on purpose, but I had cultures, and he suddenly realized this would probably be better out. One summer, we built a lab out in the stable, and what I was looking for is what is life. And so I was working with bacteria, I was working with soil mold, I was working with anything I could contain. And Mike, the interesting thing is how supportive and kind scientists were to me. I mean, I write these guys and women who were, I'm sure, real busy, and they'd send me samples back, equipment. It was like they were just incredibly generous. And so I was very fortunate there. And my main thing turned into plant gall cancer. Agrobacterium tumefaciens, and I injected into sunflower seeds because you could see the tumors grow. And what's doing that? What is life? And then at some point, I read a book on yoga, full yoga, not just hatha yoga. And the author of that said that yoga is an inner science. And just like outer science is based on evidence and things like that, the inner science is the same way. You find out for yourself. And so that person explained the basics of yoga, the hatha yoga, everything like that is a science. Meditation, turning in, science. And so they claim that the source of life, typical yoga, is Kundalini Shakti. And so that really hit me, that word. And I kept reading. There wasn't much. This is like in the early 60s. There wasn't a lot of information, but whatever I could find. And then, of course, Gopi Krishna, are you familiar with him?
Not really.
Oh, cool. Well, Gopi Krishna was a Kashmiri who had a small job as something in the government, but his Kundalini awakened. He had a very difficult time with it, but ultimately it worked, and he felt it was the secret to the evolutionary energy in humans, that it is what evolves humans. And so he began a whole quest to find scientists and other people willing to study it, participants and stuff. And he wrote a whole bunch of books and had interviews, and was really felt that Kundalini was the answer to the human predict, because if we just evolved past these very primitive, control, domination, submission, these things which we see on the news every day, it would bring in like a new age. People would be awake. We'd recognize we're all reflections of each other, and all the crazy stuff that humans are doing right to this moment would stop. So I really got on that bandwagon and bought into it. One of my first teachers was a psychology professor, Dr. Kavandapani, who was at age 6 a disciple in the Ramakrishna Vivekananda lineage, but also got his PhD here at Chapel Hill in psychology. And he introduced me to those teachings and Raja Yoga, plus the other yogas that Vivekananda wrote about. He also hoped humans would evolve. And then I went into formal training at a Shivananda ashram. Shivananda was a medical doctor, but he also wrote a book on Kundalini. And at that training, it was a 6 week training during the summer of 1971. And I learned all the basic yogas, Yoga Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, whole host of practices. It was also my first introduction that I'd been thinking of yoga as a science, but at the enculturation of the Indian culture into it, which really was the first time little warning signals went up because I had no interest. I have lots of friends who are Indians, and I've been to India. Even they or some of them fed up with the culture, but that wasn't what I was looking for. Sitting around chanting to Hindu deities, that's doing pujas, all that is not. So I took what I could. I met George Harrison, I met Ravi Shankar, I met a whole bunch of people at the ashram.
Hang
And
on. Sorry,
hmm?
Tom. You can't just say that you met George Harrison and Ravi Shankar and just move on.
Well, the ashram was in Valmoran in the mountains. And Swami Vishnu Devananda had a plane that Peter Max had painted. Are you familiar with Peter Max?
No.
If you look at the early hippie artwork, Peter Max did it, and George Harrison, Peter Max. George was studying with Ravi Shankar. Ravi Shankar brought his chief student to the ashram because they felt that everybody should know yoga. And George was up there, and tons of people would just show up. I mean, they just show up. And Swami Vishnu was really into Peter Sellers, was really into that. I mean, that's why he had this painted plane. So he liked celebrities, he liked all the drama and everything. And so we were being trained as teachers, but on the weekends, there's no telling who would show up.
That's
And Peter
fascinating.
Sellers and he flew around in his painted plane and dropped leaflets on Ireland and all sorts of things. So Swami Vishnu was in the bringing world peace.
The Beatles were great conduits for that message.
Yeah. And George, I think more than any of them, got really deeply involved in several ways, mainly with Hare Krishna, but he was had a wider vision of the possibilities and very generous in supporting communities, especially ISKCON, Hare Krishna people. I think he and John pretty much funded them. So they went from this unknown organization to,
Yeah.
and that's why.
So at this point, then, you're interested in Kundalini, you're studying with famous teachers, you're meeting these other celebrities that are also drawn to these teachings. Has material science fallen away from you at this point? Was this idea that the search goes within? Did that just make more sense than searching without?
Yes, but I was still, when I went to college, I initially was in pre-med. Pre-med, you have medicine, a lot of professions, you have to have a outstanding memory, and I don't, and I've never have. And so I could get the grades, but everything would slip away. 10 minutes later, it's pretty much not there. So I was struggling. I went up to this, I think it was a Methodist. I was in Indiana when I went to college. Methodist um, hospital in Indianapolis. And this guy who was giving us the tour, he was a doctor himself. And he said, what you really want to do is take the MD, PhD program. You can get them both, two doctorates. It's no harder because you just transfer stuff back and forth. And he was very excited. But the longer I went, the more I realized I'd be doing nothing but studying. And I actually had a dream one night, and that was the end of it. I had a very liberating dream of freedom and lack of anxiety, which I'd seldom experienced. It was just a peaceful dream. And the next day I went and dropped out of pre-med.
Okay, and just to ask then, just at this point, 'cause, we've mentioned Kundalini a few times. For people maybe that aren't, that aware of it, What is it? What is the experience of it? And what does it open up in somebody who has a Kundalini awakening?
So in Buddhism, emptiness is form, form is emptiness. So para Kundalini, you could say, is that emptiness, the infinite potentiality. And then it creates. It is. It's not just creates, but is everything. And when it creates a human being, it descends in the so-called chakra system. And so it's in a human being, and I feel it's awaken everybody, but not necessarily active. But in the descension, it brings us into the basics of life, which is survival and then reproduction. And then you're either dominant or submissive. And pretty much that's the human experience. And almost all of our programming, our language, our experience is pretty much within those realms. Even you go to a great university, everybody's in competition. Everybody's looking for a position and holding on to it. So our programming is all around that. And you can hear that in most conversations. When the Kundalini begins ascending, it starts freeing attention from just surviving, from just reproducing, from just, power plays, game playing, strategies. And it moves eventually, hopefully, into the heart. And when it moves into the heart, it's very disruptive because you literally have the experience that everybody is the same. I always use the example of, here's Mike, here's Tom, here's John, here's Sally, but this is what gives us all life. And when you have that experience, you can't really participate in the human drama the way we're expected to. You don't want to be a winner. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being successful, but you're not going to walk over people to do that. And you're not going to be able to just participate in most of the human traumas. You're in a different world. And then as it moves up and you start experiencing everything as energetically, intelligent energy. And so you could say Kundalini hypnotizes us in the form, in those lower concerns, but when it awakens and unfolds, it liberates us from that. You realize ultimately your true nature and the true nature of everybody and everything. That's ultimately the liberation, but going up through the top of the head, and all there is God or consciousness or Buddha nature, or whatever.
And can this happen spontaneously with some people, or does it require some kind of practice or yoga, or, is it something we need to engineer ourselves, or can it just pop up by itself?
Kundalini can do whatever she wants to. So, yes. One of the things that I think, and I'm not promoting Kundalini, we can get into that, but basically, the human vehicle needs to be really, really prepared for the full impulse of that awakening because it is powerful. And that's what all of the yoga is to build a foundation to really have some understanding. So a lot of the yoga practices of the purification and eating correctly and all of that stuff is to prepare the physical subtle vehicle for the full impact of Kundalini.
Do the people, doing the 20 minutes of yoga in the gym on their lunch breaks, I don't think they're aware of this.
Yeah, and their teachers aren't either. I mean, a lot of teachers are talking about Kundalini, but they really don't have, they really don't know what it is through direct experience.
Okay, so it's an energetic
Mhm.
awakening as well.
Yes, that's prana Kundalini. It's the energetic and the physical and subtle. But there's Chit Kundalini where you're going into realms of consciousness and awareness. You may be in other dimensions. You may be seeing other dimensions right here. seeing all sorts of things and hearing, and your senses, where our senses are so tuned to one dimension, so to speak, suddenly you're picking up, you're flooded with stuff. And so that's the consciousness liberating itself from programming, from the trance. And again, that can be startling because we don't realize how entranced we are until that starts falling away. And then para kundalini is where you have that total awareness, the you and source are one.
Where do you go from there then? So you're a young man, you're studying, you have this incredible dream of being peaceful and tranquil, and that beats studying something you don't want to study, and so you quit that, and what next?
I trained and lived with several Kundalini gurus, Swami Muktananda, you may have heard of, and then Sri Dhyan Yogi, who was Kundalini Mahayoga, very much the same thing. And Sri Dhyan Yogi, who I call Guruji, lived to be 116, and he was not part of the English or civilization. He came out of in India where they seldom have seen Europeans. He didn't speak a word of English when I met him. And eventually I went to India and went to the places where he had an ashram, and people were still on bullock carts and staring at us because we have light skin, and they thought he was God because many of those people, he was alive running the ashram when they were born, and now they were older people and he was still there. And so but he never took on that arrogance. He was always totally real, and people would worship and stuff, and that was just part of the culture. But he knew it was the Kundalini, and he could sit and talk like we're talking right now, no problem. And then he came to America, and then he came to our home in Connecticut when I invited him, and then eventually a center grew up in Connecticut that represented his teachings that I co-founded, and that's where I was in the 1980s.
So is that your main approach, or is it varied?
So the question is, what does a person really, really, really want? And you and I've seen your posts too, and we're pretty much on the same page here. If you want to wake up, there's nothing stopping you from doing that right now. And I think, from my view, whatever Kundalini needs to do, she'll do. We don't have to worry about her. We need to is notice awakeness is here and really be clear what we want. People want mystical experiences, and Kundalini's the way to go. I mean, you'll have fantastic experiences, but then they go away. Mm-hmm. I mean, they last for weeks, months. You could think, this is it. I'm living in perpetual bliss for the rest of my life. No, you're not. Sooner or later, but waking up, and you're clear about this in the book, it's right here, it's right here. And so I think what I discovered was Kundalini yoga, or those processes, are very entertaining, very powerful. They bring results. That's one of the things I liked about them, is you're not just sitting around meditating, reading philosophy. Stuff really, really, really happens. And also it helps you understand the teachings through your own direct experience. But first of all, they tell you if you get Shaktipat, you'll awaken. I don't remember all this in 3, 9, or 12 years or something. But if not in 3, 9, or 12 years, in your next lifetime, and if not that one, the lifetime after. So there's this cultic thing going on, and all of that just suddenly stopped for me. What I call cathexis, it just stopped. I just saw we were. You could be Kundalini yoga, you could be a Christian, you could be a Muslim, you could be anything. It's just we're being programmed to experience in a certain way. It was much easier for me to teach what I've been teaching because I was thoroughly trained in it. And to say to people the truth, which is you already are that. You're not going to be that later, after you do this, and you're not, jump through this hoop or pay this much money or go up this pyramid scheme or whatever. You are this now, here. And obviously, if as the mind grabs that first, it's like, really? But it becomes apparent at a certain point, and to be trying to sell people on something, I just couldn't, my heart wasn't in it anymore. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. It took me a long time to find ways of talking about it. And one of the people who really impacted me, we had several teachers. Then I moved to North Carolina. We had a center here, and we had some guest teachers. But Wayne Lickerman, something happened with me, with Wayne, that doesn't sound like a big thing, but it was. It wasn't dramatic. It was just obvious, and that's we. Even though we can make choices, like you and I chose to meet today, and even though uh, people do things, we all do it within a relative context of programming. Like you and I are speaking English. I doubt you and I could do this in Russian. And so we don't realize the extent that we're just programs running. And yet, what are those programs running within? That's present. That's here. So it took me a while and we were being lived. Like you and I've been breathing this whole time, our heart's beating, we've been having thoughts. All of this is a spontaneous rise from whatever. And so that's what happened. Is it took me a long time to figure out how to share this with people. And of course, the best way to share this with people is not say anything. That's a little confusing. People show up. In India, that may work.
Yeah.
But over here, I taking time. He's not saying anything.
Yeah, they don't understand the Mooney in the
Yeah,
West.
yeah, right, right.
Yeah, I would love to have met Wayne, and him and Leonard Cohen. I
Oh yeah,
when I
yeah,
went to see Ramesh Balsekar, I was always hoping that Wayne Lickerman or Leonard Cohen would walk through the door, but they didn't.
yeah.
But
I got from your book you met Ramesh, and you got what he is saying, that we're basically being lived.
yeah, but Wayne's book, No Way.
Yeah, that's his book by Ramsu.
Ramzu, yeah. I mean, that was my Bible for many years, that
Oh,
book.
good,
I mean,
good.
I loved his poetry. I love the poems themselves, but they packed such a direct punch, the wisdom in those pithy poems
Yes.
have influenced me, my conditioning. They've really shifted it into a new direction. So yeah, I can really appreciate Wayne's teachings. Yeah, I loved that book.
Yeah, his book, which I think is very useful, is Enlightenment is Not What You Think. And in that book, he talks about the false sense of authorship, which is what most people call free will. And he breaks it down in question and answers. These are recordings from his satsangs, but I think that book really is the most clear about what he's trying to point to.
Yeah, and it's obviously for the mind, it's so confusing to hear that message at first, for me anyway. And I used to go and see Tony Parsons as well, and the
Oh,
message
good.
the message is just like a slap in the face. But it took a while for me to intellectually understand that message. But of course, that's never enough.
Right.
But the sheer weight of hearing that repeated message, um, just led to this collapsing at some point where my defenses collapsed and all that was left was
Yes.
this, wide open isness, whatever you call it. I remember Ramesh used to say, now you've heard this message, your head is in the tiger's mouth.
Yes.
So it's up to that, as you said, Kundalini is going to do whatever she wants to do. Well, the fact that you've heard me say that there's nobody here doing this, that you're being lived, you're being birthed moment by moment, you are the living mystery. And yeah, your head's in the mouth now, and at some point it's going to close its jaws, and
That's it.
you'll be headless.
That's right. Headless, right? Like Harding. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
As you said, that's a
mm,
difficult message for most people. And most people who are seekers, who are invested, made a huge investment, whether it's Christian, Hindu, whatever, and to say, yes, you have choices, and yes, you can do this and that, but that's because that's the way you're programmed, that's the way you're designed, that's the way you're being lived. And if you have, from work in psychology with personalities and stuff, if you have enough information about anybody, they're extremely predictable. Even if they're trying to trick you by not being predictable, that's a certain personality adaptation right there. I try not to use the word robots when I'm teaching because people don't like being called robots. But if you really look deep enough, we are extremely predictable.
I think Gurdjieff used to call people robots or refer to them as robots because of that reason. We're just living out, our conditioning, our programming. How many events are we away from all acting on our herd mentality and picking on whoever the target happens to be, the popular target. It's happened before. We think it's not us that does that, but it's in here because we're all programmed.
Yeah,
Um,
and we're herd animals,
yeah, exactly,
and
exactly.
we're trying to get our place in the herd, whatever we perceive that as being. And the best evidence of this is just doesn't matter what channel, just turn on the news.
Yeah, which makes me always think now, from the awakened perspective, of course, there's only God, pure awareness, consciousness, Kundalini, Shakti, Shiva, whatever Buddha mind, the Tao. And I love all those different words for something that can't be worded.
Right, right,
um,
exactly.
but when you do switch on the news, if that's all there is, it's having a good time pretending that it's not here at all. There's a lot of people seemingly a million miles from it. And it makes me think how many people are seeing this.
Well, of course, the world population, I think it's 4 times greater than what it was when I was born. And so people are saying more people are awakening, but who knows?
Yeah.
Their population maybe, who knows? The drama obviously continues. I have friends who have friends in Africa who are undergoing horror. Is that whole thing in the Middle East, which has been going on for like 5,000 years, nothing new. And then it's just the human race is a very aggressive, warlike race. Not all of us, but many of us. And we could clean it all up, bring total peace to the world, and that would probably last 30 seconds. Somebody would start doing something. And so part of our expression is recognizing they are it too. That doesn't mean we don't stop them if that's our nature. And if we feel the need to help and support and do good work, so to speak, then that's who we are. And the big picture, I have no idea what it is.
Mm.
I'm very idealistic when I was young. I read about Eichmann in World War II and the Nazi concentration camps. I go, well, that'll never happen again. That's so horrible. That's the end of it. And then Vietnam started escalating, and one damn war after another. And the United States has its fingers in everything. And of course, sucking Britain in with them, or who knows who's sucking who's Canada, Britain, nobody's innocent. Yet we may be called upon to whatever is natural for us to help people teach meditation, whatever it is. But I don't think, Ramesh used to say this, that the universe is not human hearted. So human beings are very narcissistic. All religions think it's about us. We're going to be saved. We think the whole universe is about us humans. We don't consider ourselves animals. We go, the animals, the beasts. We don't consider ourselves related to fungi, which is probably a lot smarter than we are. Been around longer, still surviving. Humans are very self-centered and narcissistic, and have no problem destroying habitats like we have. Where we live, deer and all sorts of animals have to come out of the woods at night to eat because they don't have their homes anymore. What they have is a shopping center instead. Humans have no problem destroying that because we think there's humans and then the rest of life, and we're the dominant being. And so that's so narcissistically encapsulated that it's astonishing. And Ramesh is saying the universe is not human hearted really sort of pops that balloon if you look at it.
Yeah, I think that's a huge shift of perspective that it's not decided to be us,
Yeah.
and not everything else. It just happens to be us as well as everything else. But it's not,
Yes.
there's nothing special about the universe incarnating as Mike or Tom. Um,
Right.
there's
As
something
shocking
much,
as that may be.
yeah, there's something much bigger and mysterious happening. Um,
Yes.
and then this just brings me on to something I've heard you say before, in your writings about not knowing or unknowing. And I thought I'd ask you, what don't you know, Tom?
I don't know the ultimate nature of what's going on. I can't honestly say when people go, what's going on? What's the point? I don't have the answer. I have a recognition, but that's not something you can think about or put into words. It's the silence. So I of course know stuff like here we are. This I don't know much about technology, but this seemed to work out. Um, so I know details about certain things, but about the alternate nature, I'm not going to say. For instance, consciousness is consciousness created by the brain, or is the brain a receiver of consciousness? I suspect from my own experiences that this is just a receiver and transmitter, but I don't know that as a total fact. I cannot say that's the truth because I don't know. So, about the ultimate nature of things, all I can say is I know what's happening right now in my experience.
And I mean, of course, that may sound like, ignorance or even stupidity to some people who have
I've
spent their
been called
lives
both. Yeah,
where, others will probably see the wisdom in that because now you have nothing to defend or argue or
that's correct.
attack someone for believing the opposite. And it's a place of freedom, isn't it? Not knowing.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. It's a place of freedom. You don't have to grab hold of anything.
Hmm. And so that just brings me on to another thing I've heard you mention before, and I think you mentioned it briefly earlier about coming out of your training and having, this kind of awakening or shift and not knowing maybe at first how to share this and not
Yes,
not wanting to stick with the structures or the dogma around it. And so I've heard you somewhere talk about cults. Yeah, I wondered if you wouldn't just mind saying a few more words on spirituality, cults, and how liberation fits into that.
In terms of cults, I think it's important to talk about benign cults and malignant cults. So the church down the street that's feeding the homeless and doing all that, and they're really trying to understand what Jesus did and all that, they're pretty benign cult. But they are a cult because they're interpreting, they're pushing stuff out that doesn't fit and holding, they have to go to church and redo it every one. Malignant cults are everywhere and everything, and they're actually harming others and pulling some very naive people into harming others because they feel they're being told they're helping people spiritually. And we are cultic beings, whether it's politics, religion. The atheists are hilarious because, they do the same thing. Some of them can see it, but most of them don't realize that they're just another programming of beliefs. So we are cultic animals. We're herd animals, and it's natural to get into a cult. I think I was always fortunate because I always had a degree of skepticism. And when things aren't showing up a certain way or don't make sense, or you start wondering about them, if somebody shuts you down, that's a pretty good sign it's a cult. Well, of course, the main cult is right here. But I think humans go towards cults, and I think cult can start out very good, doing good things, and slowly, slowly slip over the line into a malignant cult. And I think teachers, I think my wife, Bonnie, has been with me 33 years. So she's a savior because we have seen many times people cathecting on me and thinking I have powers or I never get sick. People would freak out if I got a cold. How could you get a cold? I'm like, and other things, the cathecting. We've had to ask people to leave the center and not come back. We've even had to call police a few times. But the cult isn't just cultic leaders. People in a way want that. Some people want that. They're projecting on you. They want you up on a pedestal. They put you on that pedestal, and the first thing you do that is not satisfactory to them, then they're the ones who pull you off and attack you. So the best thing is not to get on the pedestal in the first place and to watch that going on.
Yeah.
So cults are everywhere. Yeah.
And like you, I too have always had a kind of healthy dose of skepticism, which sounds
Yes.
strange at first. When I was younger, I would, and when I was traveling in India many times, I never really got on with the hippies really, because they were, for me, they were too in it. They were too out there. They were floating around too much. But if I bumped into a mathematician or a scientist, we would click.
Yes, and they have some evidence
Mm,
that you can see and I can see. You
yeah,
don't have to believe. It can be presented.
yeah. So skepticism, I think, is really healthy, and it
Yes.
can prevent you from getting involved in cults and your own cult, or a cult of your own making. And that Groucho Marx line
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
about doesn't want to be part of any group that would have him as a member.
Right.
I mean, I think that's a good point, and that's why I've always veered away from any group or any ism when I was younger, contemplating whether I wanted to be a Buddhist and take on a Buddhist name. Just didn't really ring ring true. It was like putting on a costume or something.
Yeah, I have three spiritual names, which I've never used, and I'm willing to sell them. But yeah, it was interesting because, like you, people would come back. I'd come back from India with people, and they'd start using their spiritual names and their spiritual costumes, and the wording and the whole affectation.
Mm.
There's a doctor, Andrew Newberg. He's a medical doctor and a scientist. And in one of his books, I think it's something like Enlightenment. How does enlightenment affect the brain, or something like that? He writes in the beginning of his journey through great doubt, which brought him to awakening. And, he had a scientific mind, skeptical, and he kept just anything he came up, how do I really know this? And he kept going. And outside the Zen tradition, it's probably one of the best stories of somebody who woke up through great doubt.
It's so funny, isn't it? That the moment you have that understanding or realization, it's so present and clear and obvious that you kind of can't believe it's so present, clear, and obvious.
Correct.
When the mind is
Okay.
the mind's been doing everything it can to get hold of this, and yet when the mind's not there, it can reveal itself. Yeah, I mean, in that moment, all of the dogma and the isms, they don't touch it.
They're not necessary. They can be necessary pragmatically. I mean, there are
Yeah.
things that can be helpful pragmatically,
Yes.
but in terms of waking up,
Mm.
they literally are taking attention away from.
So speaking of attention, then, have I seen you write somewhere about neurodiversity? And if so, is that a personal experience? And does it relate to seeking awakening?
Yeah, I was born in 1949, grew up in the 50s. My parents were from the South and they'd moved north. I didn't talk for a long time. Apparently, I talked to my brother, whose name was Mike, and my parents were very concerned. I was not aware of time. I couldn't read, couldn't remember things. My mother would get, I told you this one. It's like, so in a way, looking back, and this is a story because I don't have that clear a memory, but I was in presence. And we lived for a while on a farm in Virginia. And that, I remember, it was one of my happiest times because I wasn't in school. We had dogs, we had all sorts of things, big farm. My father worked in Washington, D.C. My brother went off to nursery school or wherever he went off to. And I was pretty much left there on this big farm that was just mind boggling to me. And I just remembered being out on this huge fallen tree, looking up in the sky and just lost in the vastness. And there were snakes. I've never been afraid of snakes, but there were huge black snakes, and my mother was afraid of snakes. So I learned not to bring them in the house. By second grade, they realized I couldn't read, and I also had very poor vision. And they sent me to this place in Greenwich, Connecticut called the Haithcock School. And the young woman who taught me how to read was really, really good. She did teach me how to read. She, first of all, somehow convinced me that it would be a good idea to learn how to read. I was never real sure it was, but she was able to talk to me and say, this is a good idea. And then she somehow, I don't know how, got me reading. In school, I was not a great student. And it's like never clear why we were learning about the Macedonian Wars. I wasn't a student. I wasn't a student. So I would sit there waiting to get out of there. My mother did teach me about time. She really, drilled into me about time, which, it made me neurotic. But I really, now having people coming to appointments, I'm really into time, like show up on time. But so I really felt even writing after learning to read, when I send emails, I have to always rewrite them because it looks like Greek or something. And um, never was a great student, never imagined getting into college or anything except, when I was getting involved in science. And I assumed what I was told by other kids that I was dumb, I was ignorant, and I just accepted that. What changed that was the Vietnam War. As I watched, I was in the boys' school at that time, And they were all, that's when I first started noticing how programmed everybody is. We wore the same little jackets and ties, and, they were really, a lot of the parents were very wealthy. You turn 16, you get brand Mustang just came out, the car. And, my friends that turned 16 get a new Mustang. I go home and tell my parents, I turned 16, I would like a new car. And they just laugh and walk away. I mean, it wasn't even on the table. We're not even going to talk about it. Get a job. That's what and I did. I got a job at 16. But anyway, I bought into it. I was fine with it. And then the Vietnam War started escalating, and I started hearing more and more about it. And my question was, first, why are we there? The answer was bullshit. And the second thing was, I noticed fairly early on that no Americans knew where Vietnam was on that map. It's okay to send your kids there, billions of dollars, do this whole thing, bomb them to the ground, Agent Orange and everything. But if I put a map of the world up and said, walk over to and put your finger on Vietnam, the average American couldn't. And so then I started noticing that World War II wasn't the end of all wars, that we were propagating. I learned about MK Ultra, which is where they did it. You familiar with that?
Mind control.
Yeah, and gave out more LSD than Timothy Leary ever did to everybody, everywhere. And all these things. And I started thinking, this is all really, really stupid. And I started questioning. And, I got really interested in Shakespeare, who I think was an enlightened genius. I think he pretty much covers the human predicament and the stupidity of it very clearly. And it's not like I thought I was smarter than everybody, but I thought I really was not invested in this tragedy of ongoing warfare all the time. And I knew both parties in the United States lied to us. So my trust in politics, I still have opinions, but it diminished because both sides lied to us and tricked us, the American citizens. And so over time, I read a book called The Rape of the Mind, which was one of the first things about brainwashing, and I realized that's just ongoing process for humans. And that's when I began to question, I may have problems, but I'm not stupid enough to back warfare. I became a conscientious objector, big fan of Bertrand Russell, who was also a conscientious objector, 180 IQ. It's pretty good. And I admired the hell out of him. The Nobel Prize winner. I mean, he could have sat around a philosophy room, or mathematics room, but he didn't, and he was pretty, and he wrote a book, Why I'm Not a Christian. So that really helped me to begin to think maybe I might have something of value, because I knew I still didn't have the capacities. I have friends who were doctors. I have friends whose minds blow me away. I mean, one of my friends who was one of my students, he could read a scientific paper from the top to the bottom, put it down, and know everything in it, probably better than the author. I don't have that ability, but I did. I did realize that the human race is a mess.
That's quite a thing to see for yourself, because that's not part of the programming, is it? That's not
Right.
the part of the programming is not to question the programming. You have
Right.
to question it by yourself for whatever reason.
Yeah, and you get punished, or there are
Mm,
consequences if I got my bash beat up in peace demonstrations and stuff.
mm,
I just found out Nixon, I think it was Nixon, let the Teamsters go with their tools and everything. He was supporting the Teamsters, blue collar. That's a joke. And they went out, and they were one of the groups that beat the hell out of the peace demonstrators.
right.
And there was that sort of thing going on. But at that point, I still believed, and I think meditation is extremely good done correctly. But I still believe that humans might evolve out of all of this in my lifetime.
Mm. Well, this is the thing about sharing it with people, especially when it's coming from a sort of direct place, and that it's accepted, and it's not accepted because you're trying to convince someone.
Right.
It's just kind of clear and obvious. And I wonder if this links into the way you refer to yourself. And really resonate with this approach of being a friend, or a spiritual friend,
Yes.
rather
Yeah.
than I'm the teacher, I'm the guru. Yeah, that friendship.
Yeah. And everything I offer is self-evident. And if I say something that I think isn't self-evident, I make that clear. And it's something you can look into and find out for yourself. But the fact we're aware right now as things are coming and going, awareness, these things are self-evident. And so again, I invite everybody to be open-minded skeptics, to
Mm,
really question and doubt if they don't see it, recognize it.
yeah. And it's so powerful just to question, and kids do it all the time. And as a
Yeah,
parent,
yeah, yeah,
you get sick of that question. Why? But it's the most powerful word in the English language is why. Do we know
yeah.
why?
My daughter, hope I have this, I think she's 47, but I remember I was a single parent for a while, and I remember trying to get things done. Her going, why? Why? I tell her the answer, why? It's like,
Well, because the answers are always abstract, aren't they? Oh, because
yeah, and
blah
the
blah blah.
answer is, if we're honest, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know
the
why the sky's blue or why the sky appears to be blue.
yeah, this is it.
I don't know
Yeah.
why water freezes at 32 degrees. I don't know why they're using Celsius over there and Fahrenheit over here. It's just, tell the kids the truth. You're saying, I don't know most of the time, or
Yeah,
you're programming them.
yeah, yeah. But I also wonder how many people who are, neurodiverse in some way are more naturally drawn towards calming that system down.
I suspect you're right. I suspect there is.
Yeah,
And I think it's really good. I think sometimes they overdo it, but there is more information out there about the spectrum, neurodiversity. I think a lot of people are seekers because of it. They
yeah,
just the normal answers in programming didn't work.
yeah. That's me, and it sounds like that's you as well.
Yeah, yeah. Thank God.
Yeah, yeah. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
That's exactly right.
So,
It's a
Tom,
great conversation. Thank you.
well, it's been absolutely wonderful to speak to you and with you on all these different subjects. Before we go, what I'd love to ask as a final question is just what do people need to know?
I think the most important thing a person can do, and it's not easy, is be totally honest with themselves about what they really know. That gets you to not knowing pretty quickly. And when they are in the spiritual process with a teacher, be honest. Don't just accept something or do something. But if you have a feeling like I'm not sure this is right, go with it. You know, be totally honest. Truth and honesty are related. And I think a lot of people end up fooling themselves. Like I said, the main cult leaders here. And I understand why they do that. But if we stay in the realm of total honesty with ourselves, then we can see the teachings that are not honest and the teachers that are not honest without integrity. Do you know what the ASI is? ASI? Association for Spiritual Integrity?
I don't think so.
Yeah, you can Google it. Rick Archer, who has
Oh yeah.
Batgap, he's one of the founders of it. And course, in my naivete, I thought ASI, everybody who joined it, were people who had some experience of something bad happening cultic. And then I realized a lot of cultic people have joined it too. So still the same game is going on. So we still have to be careful.
Mm.
But I think honesty, telling ourselves the truth is the first step. And being willing to say, I don't know.